the smell hit first. Thick, rich, and intoxicating, the scent of sizzling spices mixed with something odd, yet familiar. It wasn't a scent one would expect from street food. But that was the beauty of it. It stood out. It made people curious, made them return, made them keep talking. The stall was always crowded, and the small, dimly lit corner on the outskirts of the busy market was one of the most popular spots. The woman who ran the stall had made a name for herself in a matter of months. It wasn't just the taste that made her food so special, it was something else. Something no one could quite place. Today was just another busy afternoon. The sun had dipped behind the clouds, casting a shadow over the bustling market. People lined up, their faces eager, their stomachs grumbling in anticipation. There were a few whispers in the crowd, murmurs about how her food had a flavor no one could replicate. Some claimed it was magic. Others said it was simply the perfect blend of spices. The truth, however, was far stranger than anyone could imagine. The woman, who went by the name of Alma, stood behind the counter, her dark eyes fixed on the grill. Her hands moved with a rhythm that could only come from experience. Each piece of meat was perfectly cooked, the vegetables crisped just right. The sauce she used was a well-guarded secret, one that she had perfected over the years, but even her sauce wasn't the true star of the dish. The secret ingredient was something far more unexpected. She didn't look up when a customer stepped to the front of the line. The customer, a young man in his late 20s, eagerly handed over a few crumpled bills. Alma nodded politely, scooping the freshly prepared dish into a takeout container. She slid it across the counter without a word, her focus never leaving the grill. "Thank you," the customer said, his voice soft but laced with an unspoken curiosity. Alma didn't reply, only giving him a quick glance. She had heard it all before. The comments about the taste, the repeated questions of what made her food so special, the fascination that seemed to grow with every bite people took. She knew the effect her food had on people, and she had long ago accepted the silence that followed. As the customer walked away, his eyes still glued to the food, Alma wiped her hands on her apron. The heat of the grill had started to make her sweat, but there was something else nagging at her, a feeling, a sense of unease that she couldn't quite place. "Strange," she murmured to herself. "Today feels different." She couldn't quite explain why, but it was as though something in the air had shifted. She had always been careful with her food, always ensured that each dish was exactly how it needed to be. After all, the secret ingredient wasn't something she had chosen lightly. It had taken years of research, of trial and error, to find the perfect balance. She had been the one to discover it, to refine it, and now it was her secret to keep. But today, as she served the customers, a part of her wondered, what if they ever found out? She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered in the back of her mind. She turned her attention back to the grill and focused on the next order. A woman, middle-aged, with a large scarf wrapped around her head, stood at the counter, waiting for her turn. Alma gave a polite smile and began preparing her meal. It wasn't until the next customer spoke up that the unease really began to settle in. This tastes different," the woman said, pausing mid-bite, a confused look crossing her face. Alma stiffened but quickly masked it with a smile. "Different how?" she asked casually, her voice steady despite the tightening in her chest. The woman leaned in, her brow furrowing. "I don't know. It's like nothing I've ever had before. It's rich, but there's something unusual about the taste." Alma tried not to let her discomfort show. She had heard similar comments before, but never quite like this. The woman had almost sounded unsettled, as if the flavor was bothering her. Alma's fingers tightened around the spatula she was holding. "Well, you know," Alma replied, trying to keep her tone light, "it's a special blend of spices. That's what makes it stand out." The woman didn't seem convinced. She took another bite, chewing slowly as she stared down at her food. Alma watched her, her heart thudding in her chest. Had she messed something up? Had she put too much of the secret ingredient in? No. She had made sure to follow the recipe precisely. But the woman's eyes were still scanning her plate, a perplexed look growing on her face. Is something wrong? Alma asked, a slight edge creeping into her voice. The woman hesitated before speaking again. I'm not sure. It's good, but it's almost like something familiar? But not in a good way. Alma's stomach churned, but she forced a smile. It's just a blend of flavors. Try not to think too much about it. You'll enjoy it, I promise. The woman nodded slowly, but Alma could see the doubt still hanging in her eyes. She took her food and walked away without another word, her footsteps echoing softly in the quiet space. Alma wiped her hands on her apron again, her thoughts racing. What was going on? She glanced back at the counter, where her remaining customers waited. The line was starting to dwindle, and the usual rush of the afternoon was winding down. Alma exhaled, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that clung to her like a second skin. She went back to preparing the next order, but the questions kept swirling in her mind. What had the woman meant? Why had her food tasted familiar? There was nothing she had ever put into her dishes that could explain such a reaction. Suddenly, there was another interruption. Excuse me, a man's voice called from the edge of the stall. Alma looked up to see a tall figure standing at the counter, his eyes locked on her. Yes, she asked, trying to mask her concern. The man leaned in slightly. I'm sorry to bother you, but I just had to ask, what's in your food? It tastes strange. But in a good way. I've never tasted anything like it. Alma's throat tightened. It's a secret recipe, she replied quickly, forcing her voice to stay calm. The man's eyes flickered with interest. I can't quite place it. I've been coming here for weeks, and today, it just stands out more than usual. Alma's heart raced in her chest, and for a split second, she wondered if the truth was about to come out. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not ever. She smiled, her voice smooth. It's just the way I prepare it. Some people can be sensitive to new flavors. The man seemed satisfied with the answer and took his food with a grateful nod. But Alma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Was her secret really safe? As the last customer left, the air around her felt charged with something she couldn't explain. It was as though the universe had shifted, and she was now standing on the edge of something huge. She glanced back at the grill, the sizzling sound suddenly louder in the quiet of the stall. Everything felt oddly still. Her mind raced as she tried to focus on the task at hand, but a single thought kept repeating itself like a drumbeat in her head. What if they find out? Alma turned around to face the open street beyond her stall, the last rays of the setting sun casting a pale light over the bustling market. For the first time in months, she felt a deep unease. Something was coming. And when it arrived, it would change everything. The market was quieter the next day, but something hung in the air. A strange stillness. The kind you feel when you know something is about to happen, something you can't control. Alma had noticed it as soon as she opened the stall. The sun was setting behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the market streets, but the usual buzz wasn't there. People walked past her stall without so much as a glance. That wasn't usual. Her food had always drawn people in, even the ones who weren't sure about street food. But today, the crowd seemed smaller. The familiar faces that normally filled the line were absent. A few customers passed by, glancing at the grill but then quickly walking away. Alma's heart sank. What was going on? She stood at the counter, wiping her hands on the apron, her mind swirling with questions. Had she done something wrong? Had the food somehow lost its magic? Or was it something else, something she couldn't quite grasp? The uneasy feeling from yesterday had returned, growing stronger with each passing moment. By noon, it was clear, the customers had started talking. She could hear snippets of conversation as she prepared another order. Have you tried Alma's food lately? A voice asked from the line. It doesn't taste the same, came the reply. Another customer added, I don't know. Something's off. Like it's not as good as before. Alma's hands froze for a moment. Not as good as before? She had been so careful, so meticulous about her ingredients. But now, for the first time, the customers were noticing something was wrong. Something she couldn't put her finger on. She had been running the stall for months, and until now, her food had always been a hit. The flavors were intense, the heat just right, and the secret ingredient was, well, a secret. But now, people were talking. They were noticing the difference. She glanced at the container of her precious ingredient tucked away beneath the counter. Was it finally time? Alma hesitated, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. The magic she had carefully created, the formula she had perfected, was it falling apart? As the day dragged on and the crowd remained sparse, Alma found herself growing more anxious with each passing minute. By late afternoon, her nerves were on edge. She was used to the rush, the constant stream of customers, the energy of the market. But today, it felt as though she was losing control. She couldn't afford to lose her business, not now. A man stepped up to the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Hey," he greeted, his voice casual but with a slight edge to it. Alma looked up and met his eyes. There was something about his gaze, something that made her uneasy. He was tall, dressed in a black jacket with the collar turned up, his face partially hidden beneath a cap. "Can I get the usual?" he asked, glancing at the grill. Alma nodded, masking her growing discomfort. "Coming right up," she replied, keeping her voice steady. As she prepared his food, she couldn't help but feel his eyes on her. It was as though he was waiting for something, studying her every move. She didn't like it. She worked quickly, focusing on the task, trying to ignore the unsettling sensation creeping down her spine. When she finished, she slid the dish across the counter. The man didn't take it immediately. Instead, he stared at it for a moment, then turned his gaze back to Alma. "You've been using something different, haven't you?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and almost threatening. Alma's heart skipped a beat. She kept her face calm, not wanting to give anything away. She had no idea who this man was or what he knew, but she didn't like the way he was looking at her. She could feel her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a little too sharp. The man shrugged, taking the dish with a slight smirk. "It's just, something's off with the flavor. I've had this before, but now it's different. Familiar, but in a bad way. It's like I've tasted it before, but I can't remember where." Alma's stomach twisted. She had been preparing the dish the same way for months. Used the same ingredients every single time. The only thing different today was the way the man was acting. He wasn't the first to say her food had a different taste, but there was something more to his words. It was like he knew something. He took a few bills from his pocket and placed them on the counter, his fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "I'll be back," he said cryptically, before walking away without another glance at the food. Alma stood there, her mind racing. What did he mean? She knew that this wasn't just about the flavor anymore. Something was happening. Something she hadn't expected. Her food had always been a safe place, something she controlled, something no one else could replicate. But now, it was slipping away, and she was losing control of the one thing she thought she could trust. That evening, as Alma closed up her stall, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The market was quieter now, and the few remaining vendors were packing up for the day. Her food had never failed to draw a crowd, but now, she wasn't so sure. The whispers, the strange questions, the unsettling comments, everything pointed to one thing. Her secret ingredient was no longer a secret. It was being noticed. And worse, it was being remembered. She sat on a crate behind her stall, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped down the counters. The weight of the day pressed down on her, the reality of her situation sinking in. She needed to find out who that man was, and what he knew. But more importantly, she needed to find out why he seemed so sure that something was wrong with her food. Was it possible that someone had discovered the secret ingredient? Or was there something more to this mystery, something even deeper than she could have imagined? The next day. The morning came and Alma opened her stall with a heavy heart. The strange feeling hadn't left her. In fact, it had only intensified. She had spent the night wondering if her secret ingredient had been compromised, or if someone had learned about it. But who would have known? She had been so careful, so deliberate in hiding it. No one had ever suspected. And yet, today, she felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. By mid-morning, the crowd was even smaller than the day before. The whispers were still there, but now they were more pointed. More suspicious. People were starting to wonder. She could feel the gaze of the people who passed by, their eyes lingering on the stall. Then, just as she was about to prepare an order, a familiar face appeared at the counter. It was the man from the previous day. He was back. Alma looked at him, her stomach nodding. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing. It was as though he knew something she didn't. "I think you know why I'm here," he said, his voice cold. "There's something you need to explain." Alma felt her blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied quickly, trying to keep the panic from creeping into her voice. "Oh, I think you do," the man said, stepping closer. "I think it's time you tell me what's really in your food." Alma froze. She had thought that her secret ingredient was safe, but now it seemed as though the world was closing in on her. How could he know? Before she could respond, a group of customers came up to the counter. The man stepped back, a knowing smile still lingering on his lips. "I'll be back," he said, before walking away, leaving Alma standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. The days blurred into one another as Alma's market stall continued to see fewer and fewer customers. The once lively crowd that had eagerly lined up for her famous dish was now noticeably absent. A sense of dread had crept into the air. It was as though the atmosphere had shifted, and she was trapped in a web of something she couldn't understand. Alma's thoughts had become consumed by the man who had visited her stall. The one who claimed something was wrong with her food. His words echoed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. "Something's off with the flavor. I've tasted it before, but I can't remember where." What did he mean by that? She had used the same ingredients for months, carefully crafting each dish with the precision that had made her a popular vendor. She had thought her secret ingredient was her own little mystery, something no one could figure out, something she controlled. But now, she wasn't so sure. And yet, as she worked behind the counter that day, something felt different. The bustling market was quieter than usual, and the few customers that passed by seemed distracted. Alma could feel their eyes on her. It was unsettling, but not in the way she was used to. Before, her food had drawn attention, but now, it felt like they were watching her closely, like they were waiting for her to slip up. She had grown more paranoid over the past few days, her nerves fraying at the edges. She found herself glancing over her shoulder every now and then, unsure if anyone was following her or observing her every move. The man had been back, but he hadn't spoken to her. He had simply walked by her stall, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her skin crawl. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the soft chime of the bell above her stall. A customer had approached. Alma looked up, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. It was another regular, someone she recognized from the old days when business was booming. He smiled, a familiar warmth in his eyes. "Hey, Alma," he greeted. "How's it going?" She returned his smile, though her heart wasn't in it. "Not great today," she admitted. "Things have been a little slow." The man nodded sympathetically. "I noticed. But hey, I'll still take the usual." Alma nodded, trying to push her worries aside. She worked quickly, going through the motions of preparing his order. As she did, she noticed that he seemed distracted. His eyes kept flickering to the counter, to the grill, and then to her. There was an odd tension in the air, something she couldn't quite place. "Everything okay?" Alma asked, trying to keep the conversation light. The man hesitated before answering, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his tone almost conspiratorial. "Have you ever thought about what you're really putting into your food?" Alma froze, the words striking her like a sudden punch to the gut. She looked at him, her mind racing. What does he know? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice suddenly tight. "You've always had this unique flavor," the man continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't know what it is, but I've tasted something like it before. I can't remember where, but I know it's not from around here." Alma's pulse quickened. No, not again. She forced a smile, trying to hide the panic that was rising in her chest. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "It's just food. My recipe has been the same for years." The man didn't look convinced. "It's more than that," he said, his voice growing more serious. "I've been hearing some rumors around here. People are starting to talk." Alma's stomach dropped. She felt the walls closing in on her, and she could barely catch her breath. Was it really happening? Was her secret finally exposed? She had kept it hidden for so long, and now it was unraveling in front of her. The man leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Some of the customers are saying that they're feeling strange after they eat your food. Dizziness, nausea, even strange dreams. One guy said he started hearing voices." "It's not normal, Alma." Alma's mind spun, her vision blurring. She had heard whispers like these before, but they always seemed distant, like something happening to someone else. But now, they were here, right in front of her. She was the center of it all. Her food. Her secret. The rumors were spreading. "How do you know all this?" she asked, struggling to stay calm. The man shrugged. "I just hear things. I've been in this market long enough to know when something's off. I thought I should warn you, that's all. You don't want this to get out of hand." Alma swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice thin, "but there's nothing wrong with my food." But as she said it, she felt the weight of her own words sink in. "Is there?" The man stared at her for a long moment, his eyes unblinking. "Maybe. But I think you should be careful. People are starting to wonder. People are starting to wonder, and when that happens, it's hard to stop." He left without another word, his footsteps fading into the growing silence. Alma stood there, frozen, staring at the counter. She could still hear his words echoing in her mind. People are starting to wonder. Her heart pounded in her chest. The truth was becoming undeniable. People were noticing. They were asking questions. And what if they found out the real secret? Later that evening, Alma sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the ingredient that had started it all. The small container sat on her kitchen counter, as unassuming as ever. She had always known it was special. It was her secret. The thing that made her food stand out from everything else in the market. But now, looking at it, it seemed more like a ticking time bomb. Alma had stumbled upon the ingredient by accident, years ago, during a time in her life when she had nothing left to lose. She had been struggling, scraping by with barely enough money to feed herself. But then, one night, she found it. The small vial, hidden in the back of an old, dusty shop that sold strange herbs and spices from distant lands. The shopkeeper had warned her, told her it was not for the faint of heart. But Alma, desperate to change her life, had bought it anyway. It had been expensive, more than she could afford. But she had believed in it. She had believed in the magic it promised. The first time she used it in her food, the results had been nothing short of extraordinary. People came from all over to try her dish, and soon, her stall became the most popular in the market. The secret ingredient had worked wonders, too many wonders. She had been careful, using just enough to create the perfect balance of flavors, never revealing too much. But now, it was all slipping away. What if the ingredient wasn't just special? What if it was dangerous? What if people were right to feel strange after eating it? Alma's mind raced. She couldn't ignore the signs anymore. She had to find out what was going on, and fast. The man's warning had shaken her to the core, but it wasn't enough. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth about the ingredient she had used for so long. She could feel the walls closing in around her, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. There had to be a way to fix this. There had to be a way to keep her secret intact, to keep her business alive. She grabbed her coat and left the apartment, determined to find out what she needed to know. The mystery was far from over, and she wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. Alma's steps were quick as she made her way through the crowded streets. The vibrant colors of the market, the loud calls of vendors, and the smells of spices and fresh produce filled the air. But none of it could shake the feeling of dread that had settled deep inside her. The man's warning still echoed in her ears. People are starting to wonder. Her heart raced as she moved past the familiar faces of regular customers and market vendors who had once greeted her with smiles. Now, she couldn't help but feel their stares, the quiet whispers that followed her every step. It was as if the weight of the world had shifted onto her shoulders. She wasn't just another food vendor anymore. She was the center of suspicion. A secret was hanging over her head, and she was determined to uncover what it was before it consumed her. Alma's mind was a blur of questions. What was in that ingredient? Who had really created it? Why had it caused such strange side effects in her customers? Most importantly, what would happen if people found out the truth? Could she continue using it? Could she stop using it without destroying everything she had worked for? Her pace quickened as she approached the small shop at the edge of the market. The shop was tucked away between two larger buildings, hidden from the hustle and bustle of the main thoroughfare. It had always intrigued Alma, a place that seemed out of time, filled with mysterious jars and bottles of strange herbs, spices, and powders from distant lands. It was here that she had first encountered the ingredient that had changed her life, and, it seemed, was now threatening to destroy it. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the familiar scent of dried herbs and incense filling her nose. The shop was dimly lit, the shelves packed with an array of items that seemed both ancient and foreign. In the far corner, behind the counter, the old shopkeeper stood, his wrinkled face and knowing eyes never missing a detail. He didn't look surprised to see her. In fact, it was as if he had been expecting her. "You've come to ask about the ingredient," he said, his voice low and raspy. Alma didn't speak. She simply nodded, her throat tight. She had spent days trying to push the nagging doubt away, but now, standing in front of the man who had sold her the ingredient, it all felt so much more real. The shopkeeper motioned for her to sit, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can tell by the look in your eyes. You've started to question the food you're serving. You've noticed the changes, haven't you?" Alma's mouth went dry. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. Instead, she simply nodded again. The man's gaze softened, and he lowered his voice. "I warned you when you first bought it. This ingredient is not meant for the faint of heart. It's powerful. It's ancient. But it's not without consequence." Alma clenched her fists in her lap. "What do you mean?" she asked, the words almost a whisper. "What is it? Where did it come from?" The shopkeeper leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's called zelera, a rare root that grows only in the most remote regions. It has been used for centuries, but not in the way you've been using it. You see, zelera is not just a flavor enhancer. It has properties that affect the mind, the senses, even the soul." Alma's heart skipped a beat. "The mind? The senses? What do you mean? I thought it was just an ingredient, something to give my food a unique taste." "That's all." The shopkeeper shook his head slowly. "Zelera is far more than that. It was never meant for human consumption in the way you've been using it. It alters perception, opens pathways to the subconscious. It heightens emotions, causes vivid dreams, and sometimes, it can even create a sense of connection between people. But, he paused, it can also have side effects. Powerful, dangerous side effects. It can confuse people, make them question their own reality. Alma felt the color drain from her face. I had no idea, her voice trailed off, and her mind raced. All those strange reactions from her customers, the feelings of unease, the whispers she had been hearing from the people around her, it was all connected. The shopkeeper continued, his voice dropping lower. You're not the first to use Zelera, but you may be the first to use it in such a way. The root works differently for different people, and some cannot handle its effects. The strange feelings your customers have been experiencing, the dreams, the confusion, they are all symptoms of the root's power. And it's only going to get worse. Alma felt her chest tighten. What am I supposed to do? I can't just stop selling my food. People depend on me. This is my life. My business. I understand, the shopkeeper interrupted. But you need to be aware of the risks. If you continue to use Zelera, the consequences could be severe. People will start to realize what's happening. They'll connect the dots. And once that happens, your reputation will be ruined. It will be impossible to go back. Alma stood up, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. She had worked so hard to get where she was, to build something that mattered, to create something that was special. She couldn't just walk away from it all. But could she continue using an ingredient that was causing harm? I need to know more, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Where can I find more information about this ingredient? How can I stop the effects? The shopkeeper regarded her carefully, his eyes thoughtful. There are only a few who truly understand Zelera. And not all of them are willing to share their knowledge. But there is one place you could go, an old herbalist who lives deep in the forest. She knows more about Zelera than anyone else. But it won't be easy to find her. And once you do, you'll need to be ready for what you might discover. Alma's heart raced. Where do I find her? The shopkeeper hesitated for a moment before speaking. Follow the path north, past the river, and into the hills. There is an ancient grove where the trees are twisted and dark. She will be there, waiting. Alma didn't hesitate. She turned and made her way to the door, her mind already racing with the possibilities. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she had no choice. She had to find the answers. She had to make things right. The next morning, Alma set out before the sun had fully risen. Her heart pounded with determination as she left the market behind, leaving the whispers of suspicion and the unease of the past few days in her wake. She followed the shopkeeper's directions, moving north through the dense forest, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. The path was rough, the terrain uneven, but Alma didn't slow down. The further she traveled, the more her anxiety grew. What if she couldn't find the herbalist? What if the journey was all for nothing? But she couldn't afford to turn back now. Her reputation, her livelihood, and her customers' well-being were all on the line. By midday, she reached the river, its waters rushing past with a force that seemed almost unnatural. Alma paused for a moment, gathering her bearings before continuing on. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her chest with every step. She had to find answers, no matter the cost. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the forest, she finally spotted it, a grove of ancient trees, their gnarled branches twisted in strange patterns. There was something eerie about the place, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. But she pressed on, her determination unwavering. Deep within the grove, a small hut stood, tucked between the trees. A soft light flickered from within. Alma approached cautiously, her heart racing as she knocked on the door. The door creaked open, revealing an old woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet wisdom. Her gaze seemed to pierce through Alma, as though she already knew why she had come. "You seek answers," the woman said, her voice low and rasping. "Come in, child. I've been waiting for you." Alma stepped over the threshold of the hut, the door creaking shut behind her. The air inside was thick with the smell of dried herbs and smoke, a blend of scents that stung her nostrils but somehow also comforted her. The herbalist's dwelling was dimly lit, with candles flickering along the rough-hewn wooden beams. The room was filled with shelves of dried plants, jars of unidentifiable substances, and books piled high on a table near the center of the room. Alma's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she took in her surroundings, wary yet intrigued. The old woman stood beside a stone hearth, her gnarled hands moving slowly as she stirred something in a large pot, the contents bubbling softly. There was a stillness to her presence that seemed to command the space. "You've traveled far," the herbalist said, her voice raspy yet calm. Her eyes met Alma's with an intensity that made Alma's breath catch in her throat. It was as if she knew exactly why Alma was here, without needing to ask. "I'm looking for answers," Alma replied. Her voice steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. She had no idea what to expect. She had heard the stories of powerful women who knew things that others didn't, whose knowledge could heal or destroy. She wasn't sure which side of the line this woman would fall on. "About Zelera?" the herbalist asked, her tone matter of fact. Alma nodded, her throat tight. "Yes. The root that I've been using in my food. I need to understand it. I need to know what it's doing to my customers." The herbalist turned her gaze to the bubbling pot, her expression unreadable. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Zelera is not a plant meant for consumption. At least, not in the way you've been using it. Its power runs deep, far deeper than most can understand." Alma stepped closer, her voice urgent. "But why? Why is it affecting my customers the way it is? They've been having strange dreams, unusual sensations. Some of them say they feel connected to each other in ways they can't explain. What's happening to them?" The herbalist's eyes softened, though her expression remained solemn. She gestured to a chair beside the hearth. "Sit, child. This will take time to explain. The story of Zelera is long, and its roots go back to a time when things were not as they are now." Alma sank into the chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The air around her felt heavy, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the herbalist was about to tell her would change everything. The herbalist began speaking, her voice low and steady. "Zelera is an ancient root, older than many of the plants you know. It is found only in certain places, hidden away in the deep forests where the earth is untouched by human hands. The root is not just a plant, it is a conduit. A link between the physical world and something else, something beyond our understanding." Alma leaned forward, hanging on every word. "Long ago, the root was used in rituals, not to be consumed, but to open the mind and spirit. It allowed the one who ingested it to experience a deeper connection to the world around them. It was said to give visions, to reveal truths hidden within the soul. But it was never meant to be used lightly. The effects of Zelera are not always predictable. For some, it brings enlightenment, for others, it leads to madness." Alma felt a chill run down her spine. Madness? Was that what was happening to her customers? The herbalist paused, as if considering how much to reveal. "There are stories, old stories passed down from generation to generation, of people who consumed Zelera and lost themselves completely. They became lost in their own minds, unable to distinguish reality from the visions the root gave them. It's said that the root can open doors in the mind, doors that should not be opened." Alma shook her head, disbelief and fear swirling inside her. "So you're saying that the strange things happening to my customers, the dreams, the sensations, the feelings of connection, it's all because of Zelera? That it's opening their minds to something dangerous?" The herbalist nodded, her eyes darkening. "Yes. The root is not just affecting the body. It's affecting the mind, the emotions, and even the soul. When it's consumed in large quantities, it can blur the lines between what is real and what is imagined. It creates connections, yes, but those connections are not always healthy. Sometimes, they're unnatural." Alma's heart pounded in her chest. "But what am I supposed to do? I've been serving it to people for months. I didn't know. I didn't realize." The herbalist sighed deeply, walking over to a shelf lined with jars filled with dried plants. She picked one up, holding it out to Alma. You need to stop using Zelera, immediately. There is no easy way to reverse its effects once it's been consumed. The longer people ingest it, the deeper it will affect them. Some may even become addicted to the feelings it creates, chasing after something they can never truly have. Alma's mind was racing. But I can't just stop. I've built everything on this. My business, my reputation. People love my food. They depend on me. I can't just tell them it's over. The herbalist looked at her with a sadness in her eyes. You have to decide, child. You can't continue down this path without consequences. People will start to notice, and when they do, it will be too late. You may lose everything, your customers, your livelihood, your peace of mind. And you'll have to live with the knowledge that you played a part in something that is beyond your control. Alma's throat tightened. The weight of what she had done, the secret ingredient she had introduced into her food, was more than she could bear. She had been so focused on making her business successful, on providing something unique, something special, that she hadn't stopped to think about the consequences. Now it was all unraveling, and she didn't know how to stop it. You've opened a door, Alma, the herbalist continued, her voice low. And now you must choose whether to close it or let it consume you. Alma's hands trembled in her lap. But how do I close it? How do I fix this? The herbalist's eyes softened with a glimmer of understanding. You must find the antidote. There is a way to undo the effects, but it will not be easy. You will need to find another rare ingredient, one that can counteract the power of Zelera. But it is not something you can just buy or gather on your own. The antidote is guarded by those who have long kept the secret of Zelera's true power. Alma felt her stomach drop. Where do I find it? The herbalist's gaze darkened. There are only a few who know the location of the antidote. And some of them will not want to give it up. You must be prepared for what lies ahead. The journey will be perilous. But if you wish to save your customers, and yourself, you must take it. The journey will be perilous. But if you wish to save your customers, and yourself, you. The herbalist nodded slowly, as though she had expected this response. You must leave at once. There is no time to waste. But be careful. You are not the only one searching for the antidote. There are others who seek the power of Zelera for darker purposes. Alma felt a chill run through her as she realized the full extent of the danger she was in. But she had no choice. She had to finish this. She had to find the antidote, stop the effects of the root, and protect her customers from the harm she had unknowingly caused. With that, she turned and stepped out of the herbalist's hut, the weight of the world on her shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, and she didn't know what would come next, but one thing was clear, she wasn't going to stop until she had found the antidote and set things right. Alma's heart raced as she walked through the dense forest, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves beneath her boots. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the occasional sharp tang of herbs. She had been traveling for hours, the path growing darker and more difficult to navigate as the sun dipped behind the trees. Her thoughts raced just as fast as her pulse, time was running out, and she had no idea what dangers lay ahead. The herbalist's words echoed in her mind, there are others who seek the antidote, and they will stop at nothing to get it. Alma had been prepared for difficulty, for hardship. But she wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared to face people who knew the true power of Zelera and would stop at nothing to harness it. The stakes were far higher than she had imagined. She had thought she was just trying to save her business, but now, she was involved in something much larger, something much more dangerous. Her hand brushed against the rough bark of a tree as she pushed forward, her eyes scanning the area. She had no choice but to continue. She couldn't go back now. Not after what she had learned. Not after the effects Zelera had already had on her customers. It had taken so much from them, and she could only imagine how much more it could take. I will stop this, she thought fiercely. I'll find the antidote and undo the damage I've caused. But with every step she took, doubt crept into her mind. What if she couldn't find the antidote in time? What if the journey was too much for her to handle? And worst of all, what if she was already too late? She had no answers, just the relentless determination to keep moving. She couldn't afford to think about failure. Not now. As the sky darkened, the forest seemed to close in around her. She had been following a narrow trail for what felt like an eternity, and now, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapping of a twig, sent her heart leaping into her throat. She paused, her breath coming in quick bursts. In the distance, the faintest glimmer of light cut through the darkness, a fire, perhaps, or the reflection of something in the woods. Alma squinted into the gloom, trying to make out what it was. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished. Her gut twisted. She knew she wasn't alone. Without thinking, she began moving again, faster now, keeping low, blending with the shadows. She was getting closer. She had to stay focused. But the deep, unsettling feeling that someone, or something, was watching her made it difficult to concentrate. The sound of footsteps behind her, soft but unmistakable, made her freeze. Her breath caught in her throat as she whipped her head around, searching the darkness. But there was nothing. Just the blackness of the forest. Her heart hammered in her chest. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel it, something was out there, trailing her, watching her. Her mind raced with the possibilities. Had someone followed her from the herbalist's hut? Had the people who sought the antidote already found her? Or was it something else, something she couldn't even imagine? She pressed on, her footsteps quieter now, as if she could somehow make herself invisible. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more disturbing than the last. She had to find the antidote. She had to stop Zelara's effects from spreading. But how much time did she have left? She rounded a bend in the path, and then, there it was, a clearing. The light she had seen earlier grew brighter, and Alma's eyes widened as she stepped into the open space. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone structure, overgrown with vines and moss, its weathered surface marked by time. It was small, but there was no mistaking the significance of the place. This was where the antidote would be, she was certain of it. The firelight flickered from a stone brazier in the center of the clearing, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the trees. Alma stepped forward cautiously, her mind racing. She had come this far, but now that she was so close, doubt crept in once again. What if it's a trap? What if they're waiting for me here? She didn't know the answer, but she couldn't stop now. She had to take the chance. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the structure. She could feel the weight of history in the air, the energy of a place that had been hidden away for centuries. As she stepped closer, she saw a small stone altar near the base of the structure. And there, resting on the altar, was a small vial filled with a dark liquid, clear yet dark, its surface shimmering with an almost unnatural glow. Alma's breath caught in her throat. The antidote. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers brushing the cool glass of the vial. The moment she touched it, a voice, low and gravelly, sounded from behind her. You shouldn't have come here. Alma spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a man, tall and imposing, his face shadowed by the hood of his cloak. His eyes gleamed with a cold, predatory light, and his presence felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. He was one of them. Alma instinctively stepped back, clutching the vial to her chest. Who are you? The man's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. Someone who has been waiting for you, Alma. We've known about you for a long time. We've been following your every move. Her stomach sank. You've been following me? He nodded. You're not the only one who seeks the antidote. There are others who understand the true power of Zelara, and we're not about to let you take it from us. Alma's heart raced. You can't, this is for my customers. For the people who've been affected by the root. It's not for you to control. The man's eyes darkened, his smile vanishing. You misunderstand. The antidote is not meant to be used to undo the effects of Zelera. It is meant to control it, to use it for our own purposes. Alma's blood ran cold. She realized